Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Severus Snape is one of the most mysterious and tragic characters in the entire Harry Potter saga. Behind the mask of a stern professor lies a man whose life is full of pain, betrayal, difficult choices, and unexpected loyalty. The filmmakers did their best to portray the complexity of his character, but many key elements from the books never made it to the screen. Today, we'll talk about scenes that were left out, distorted, or simply simplified. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Snape is responsible for the Potters' deaths. The films overlook a crucial detail. It was Snape who inadvertently played a key role in the deaths of Lily and James. He was the one who delivered the prophecy he overheard from Sybil Trelawney to Voldemort. The Dark Lord interpreted it in his favor and chose Harry as the threat. Of course, Snape didn't realize what his report would lead to, and when he found out, he was devastated. This tragic mistake became a cross he bore for the rest of his life. The films emphasize his guilt, but they failed to show just how deeply he was entangled in the chain of fatal events. Number 2. Snape is partially to blame for Sirius's death. The films show Sirius suffering in the confinement of Grimmauld Place, but in the books it's Snape who acts as a catalyst for his death. During their interactions, Snape constantly taunts Sirius, highlighting his uselessness, his weakness, and his isolation. These jabs wounded Sirius deeply and pushed him toward reckless decisions. Eventually, eager for action, Sirius rushes into the Ministry of Magic where he meets his end. While Snape didn't kill him directly, his biting provocations were the final straw. Number 3. Snape as headmaster. When the Death Eaters take control of Hogwarts, Snape becomes the new headmaster. On the surface, he appears to be Voldemort's loyal servant, but behind the scenes, he does everything he can to protect the students. He secretly softens the Carrow's brutal punishments, intervenes when necessary, and risks exposure to shield lives. The books reveal how thin the line is between betrayal and self-sacrifice. The films leave this nuance in the shadows, portraying Snape more as an emotionless executor than a man engaged in a deadly double game. Number 4. Veritaserum. In one of the tensest scenes in Order of the Phoenix, Umbridge demands that Snape use Veritaserum to interrogate the students. He replies that he has none left, a simple excuse at first glance. But the book reveals the truth. Snape had been giving Umbridge a placebo from the start. He never allowed the real potion to be used on children. It's one of the rare moments where we see him as a protector, willing to deceive the authorities to keep the students safe. Number 5. James saved Snape's life. Why does Snape hate Harry so much? The answer lies in the past. James Potter was a hero to his son, but a tormentor to Snape. He mocked and humiliated him, and once he even saved Snape's life. But Snape never saw this as an act of nobility. He believed James only acted to protect himself. If Snape had died, James would have been expelled. This toxic mix of resentment and grudging gratitude forever tainted Snape's view of everyone who reminded him of that time, especially Harry. Number 6. Occlumency. The Occlumency lessons are shown briefly in the films, but an important moment is left out. When Harry breaks into Snape's memories, he sees the humiliation Snape endured at James's hands. But in the book, Lily is also present, and she tries to defend him. Cornered, Snape lashes out and calls her a mudblood. This moment is a painful scar for him. By cutting Lily from this scene, the film removes one of the most crucial layers of their relationship, a moment when love clashed with pride and fury. Number 7. Snape proves Voldemort's return. After Voldemort returns, Harry is nearly alone in believing it. The Ministry refuses to accept the truth, but in the book, Snape provides one of the few undeniable pieces of evidence. He shows the dark mark on his arm to Minister Fudge. The films omit this moment, perhaps seeing it as insignificant. But in reality, Snape becomes the first official confirmation of Harry's words, sacrificing his cover for the sake of truth. Number 8. The memory of Lily that changed everything. He stood before Dumbledore, silent, pale, shaking. The war was raging, Harry's life was in danger, and still Dumbledore asked, "After all this time?" Snape closed his eyes. "Always," he whispered. That single word became a monument. The film gave us the moment, but the book gave it weight. In the Deathly Hallows, Harry sees the truth unfold inside the pensive. Among the memories is one that stops time, a silver doe gliding through the forest. It was Snape's Patronus, the same as Lily's, the same as the girl he loved even after her death. "You have your mother's eyes," people had told Harry his whole life. But Snape didn't see Lily in Harry's face. He saw her in the form of light he conjured to survive the darkness. A Patronus is born of joy, of hope. For Snape, that hope had died with Lily. And yet her memory lived in his magic, in his every secret step, in the way he protected Harry, not for the boy himself, but for the love he could never let go. The film showed a flicker of this. The book showed a life frozen in grief, lit by the last echo of a girl who once said his name without fear. Number 9. Snape's forgotten role in protecting the Philosopher's Stone. There were 7 enchantments guarding the Philosopher's Stone, each crafted by a different professor. The film showed most of them: Fluffy, Devil's Snare, Flying Keys, a life-size chessboard. But one of the most brilliant defences was left out completely. It belonged to Severus Snape. His trap wasn't brute force or magical creatures, it was logic. 7 potions stood on a table, flames behind and ahead. Only one would let you move forward, another would take you back. The rest were poison or fire. "Only one who has studied logic," the riddle read, "can see the way." Hermione solved it, not with spells, but with her mind. "This isn't magic," she said. "It's logic, a puzzle. A lot of the greatest wizards haven't got an ounce of logic." Snape's challenge was elegant, cold, unemotional. It rewarded patience, not power. That single task said more about him than any scene in the dungeon ever could. He didn't teach just potions, he taught how to think. And in the film, that part of him, sharp, measured, brilliant, vanished without a trace. Number 10. The duel with McGonagall and his escape. Wands clashed in the great hall. Sparks flew. Minerva McGonagall stood her ground, fury burning in her eyes. Across from her, Severus Snape, silent, unreadable. In the film, the duel is brief. Snape blocks, retreats, crashes through a window. It looks like defeat. It looks like fear. But the book tells another story. Snape never attacked her, not once. He deflected her spells with ease, redirecting them toward the Carrows, 2 Death Eaters standing behind him. He didn't run out of cowardice. He fled to preserve the lie, to protect his role. Snape, who had no wish to kill his colleagues, the book says, even cornered, he chose control over chaos. He didn't want to hurt her, and he didn't want her to know the truth, not yet. That moment was a message to McGonagall, to the students, to the Order. He could have fought, he could have destroyed, but he didn't. He vanished in smoke, leaving behind only questions. Not because he lost, but because he cared. And in caring, he walked away from the only people who might have understood. Number 11. The end of Snape and Lily's friendship. He didn't mean to say it, but he did. One word. Mudblood. And it shattered everything. In The Order of the Phoenix, Harry dives into Snape's memory and sees it unfold. James Potter and Sirius Black torment a young Severus. Lily rushes in, furious, defending him, and Snape, humiliated and cornered, lashes out at the only person who stood up for him. "I don't need help from filthy little mudbloods like her. Don't stillstand." The word burned worse than any curse. In the book, Lily doesn't just walk away, she fights back. She tells Snape she's tired of his excuses, tired of the friends he keeps. "You call every one of my birth mudblood, Severus," she says. "Why should I be any different?" It wasn't a slip. It was a pattern. And for her, that was the end. That moment wasn't just the loss of a friendship. It was the death of his only light. The films hint at their history. They show glimpses. But they never let us feel the moment it all broke. In the book, that single insult changes the path of Snape's life. He doesn't just lose Lily, he loses the one person who believed there was still good in him. And it haunts him for the rest of his days. He never says that word again, but its echo is carved into every decision he makes. Number 12. The Long Road to Redemption. When Severus Snape realized that the prophecy he had delivered to Voldemort had led to Lily Potter's death, something inside him broke. He didn't run, he didn't beg, he went straight to Albus Dumbledore. "Hide them, all of them, keep them safe," he pleaded, but it was too late. That night, Lily died, and from that moment on, Snape stopped living for himself. His life became penance. He agreed to spy, not once, not briefly, but for years. Every day he faced Voldemort's suspicion, Death Eater's cruelty, and the constant danger of exposure. He didn't ask for redemption, he didn't expect absolution. "What will you give me in return, Severus?" Dumbledore had asked. "Anything," Snape answered. And he meant it. He gave everything, his soul, his safety, his name. In return, he asked for only one thing, that Lily's son be protected. The films show Snape as a secret double agent, but they miss the emotional weight. They miss the quiet moments where Snape waits in the dark, knowing no one will ever thank him. They miss the crushing truth. He chose to live with guilt, not escape it. "You disgust me," Harry once told him. Snape never argued. He believed it too. That was his punishment. And still he kept going, not for glory, for her. Number 13, The Secret of Gryffindor's Sword. Deep in the frozen woods, Harry Potter saw something impossible. A silver doe moved silently between the trees, glowing, elegant, not of this world. It turned to him, then vanished toward a frozen pool. There, at the bottom of the water, lay the sword of Godric Gryffindor. The films treat it like fate, like magic working on its own. But the books tell a different story. The doe was a Patronus. It belonged to Severus Snape. Dumbledore had planned it long before. "You must give it to Potter, but he must not know it comes from you," he instructed. The task was nearly impossible. Snape had to reach Harry in hiding. He had to find him alone. He had to do it without ever being seen. And he did. The silver doe, his Patronus, the shape of lilies, led Harry to the sword. It wasn't chance. It wasn't divine magic. It was Snape, risking exposure, risking everything to complete one more impossible mission. The symbolism was sharp. The sword belonged to Gryffindor, to the House of the Brave. And yet it was delivered by a Slytherin who had spent his entire life misunderstood. Snape didn't want thanks, he didn't want recognition, he only wanted Harry to survive. He left the sword and disappeared into the shadows again. Never once did he claim it, never once did he tell a soul. "Does it make a difference being the one who gave it?" he asked Dumbledore. The answer was no, that was the point. In this moment, Snape becomes the invisible hand of salvation. The films let it slip by, showing the sword as a magical coincidence, but the truth is more human and more heroic. Snape was still hiding behind the mask of the Death Eater, but beneath it he was fighting for the boy he once called his enemy, not out of love for the boy, but out of love for the mother. Number 14, Public Betrayal of Remus Lupin. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Professor Snape crosses a line that even his usual bitterness rarely touches. The moment is brief, but its consequences ripple far beyond the page. During a conversation with students, Snape casually reveals that Remus Lupin, former Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, is a werewolf. He doesn't say it with concern, he says it with intent, with malice, as if to poison Lupin's already fragile standing in the wizarding world. "It is common knowledge that Professor Lupin is a werewolf," Snape says coldly, in front of an entire class, stripping away what little privacy Lupin had left. This act doesn't come from duty, it comes from vengeance. Snape waited, bided his time since the Prisoner of Azkaban, where Lupin and Sirius exposed his cruelty and nearly derailed his position at Hogwarts. The book makes it clear. Snape did not act to protect students. He acted to humiliate an old rival. The moment he had a chance, he used Lupin's condition like a weapon. It didn't matter that Remus had taught with grace, kindness, and control. One sentence from Snape was enough to reignite the public's fear. Remus was forced to resign again. The films ignore this. They leave Lupin's quiet disappearance unexplained, as if he faded by choice. But the book tells a harder truth. Snape's words shattered Lupin's fragile acceptance in society. The wizarding world, so quick to distrust, turned their backs the moment they were reminded what he was. "Parents will not want a werewolf teaching their children," Lupin says quietly, knowing the fight is already lost. He doesn't blame Snape aloud, but he doesn't need to. This moment is one of the few where Snape's darker nature isn't cloaked in sacrifice or strategy. There is no mission behind it, no hidden loyalty, just pain turned outward. Old wounds turned into cruelty. It reminds us that Severus Snape, for all his complexity, was still a man driven by long-held grudges. And sometimes even heroes fall to their own bitterness. Number 15, complete obedience to Dumbledore. In the dimly lit tower where fate would soon fall like a blade, Severus Snape climbed the steps, not as a free man, but as a servant of a master plan so dark and painful that even he, the master of restraint, could not hide the anguish stitched into every movement. The films show this scene with swift finality. Snape raises his wand, the spell strikes, and Albus Dumbledore falls. But the book tells a deeper, more terrible truth. Snape was not just executing a dying man's wish, he was damning himself with full knowledge of what that act would cost. It was not murder. It was obedience, devotion, and sacrifice, stitched together in a single, irrevocable moment. Albus Dumbledore, ever the orchestrator of destinies, had already foreseen his death. He knew his time was limited, his body cursed beyond repair by the ring of Marvolo Gaunt. In private, he laid out his final request, not to be saved, not to be mourned, but to be destroyed by the hand of someone he trusted above all others. He chose Severus Snape, and in doing so, he gave the potions master the cruelest gift of all, a task that would sever him from the light forever. "You must kill me, Severus," he said in the book, a line that never breathed life in the film. It was a request that tasted of poison and penance. The act would be more than symbolic, it would be the hinge upon which the entire war turned. Snape, for all his stoicism, did not accept this task lightly. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Rowling describes Snape's reaction to the plan with bleak clarity. When Dumbledore tells him what must be done, Snape's reply is sharp and distressed. "You ask too much." This sentence, almost whispered in the book, echoes louder than any spell. It shows a man torn between what he must do and what he believes is right. The film, however, reduces this intricate dynamic to a glance and a moment. It strips away the internal war that raged within him, the torment of a man who would kill the only person who ever trusted him completely. This murder was not merely an execution, it was a final obedience, a dark promise fulfilled. Snape agreed to bear the brunt of the world's hatred, to let Harry, the Order, and even Voldemort see him as a murderer. The depth of that sacrifice is drowned in the film's brevity. Rowling, through her prose, makes it clear that Snape's decision was not just painful, it was redemptive. He was not killing for gain or pleasure. He was killing to protect Draco Malfoy from becoming a murderer, to preserve the illusion of loyalty to Voldemort, and to ensure the endgame of a plan only Dumbledore could architect. Dumbledore, in choosing Snape, did not simply seek a pawn. He entrusted the heart of his strategy to a man who had already endured more loss and bitterness than most. Snape had pledged himself to Dumbledore not for fame or forgiveness, but for Lily. And yet, by the time he agreed to kill the headmaster, it was more than Lily's memory that bound him. It was a belief, reluctant and tortured, that Dumbledore's vision was the only hope for the world. The scene on the astronomy tower should have been the culmination of years of pain and loyalty, but the film delivers it as if Snape was simply finishing a mission. The books paint a more human Snape, a man stripped bare by his own choices. The killing of Dumbledore was not heroic, it was tragic. He was forced to wear the cloak of a traitor to preserve a future that he might never live to see. Rowling writes, "Severus, please." And though the film shows the moment, it lacks the context of their prior conversation, the months of planning, the ache in Dumbledore's voice as he begs, not for life, but for mercy from the only man who truly understood what it meant to carry such a burden. There is a moment in the book that does not exist in the film, when Snape argues with Dumbledore about the weight of the task. Dumbledore acknowledges the damage such an act will do to Snape's soul. "I am not worried, Severus," he says quietly. "I am with you." These words are more than comfort. They are a solemn oath. Dumbledore accepts the cost Snape will pay. He knows this act will cast Snape even deeper into the shadows, but he also knows that no one else can bear it. In that moment, Snape is not just an agent, he is the last torchbearer of Dumbledore's legacy. This loyalty, this brutal obedience, reshapes our understanding of Snape. He is no longer merely a double agent, slithering through cracks in the wall. He is a man who becomes the executioner of the only person who ever saw good in him. That is a punishment more cruel than death, and it is that pain that the films fail to capture. Alan Rickman's performance is exquisite, but the script denies him the emotional landscape the book so vividly builds. There is no mention of Snape's anguish, no scene where he pleads, no time for the audience to see the storm behind his eyes. Rowling writes that Snape's face was hard, even furious, as he casts the spell. This fury is not directed at Dumbledore, nor even at Draco, who cannot complete the task. It is a fury at fate, at circumstance, at the position he has been forced into. It is the fury of a man who has played the game for so long and now must make the final, losing move. In the film, this emotion is smoothed over, dulled by the need for pacing and visual spectacle. But in the book, every word is a wound. Number 16, Quiet Protection of Neville Longbottom. Under the oppressive shadows of Severus Snape's tenure as headmaster of Hogwarts, a quiet resistance burned within the walls of the castle. The corridors echoed with whispered plans. Bruised students limped back to their dormitories, and the names of Amicus and Electo Carrow instilled dread in hearts too young to understand war. Yet, in this atmosphere of fear, where betrayal felt more likely than protection, there existed moments so subtle they went unnoticed, even by those they were meant to save. One of those moments belonged to Neville Longbottom, and behind it stood the most misunderstood protector of them all, Severus Snape. Neville, long perceived as clumsy and forgettable, had matured into something stronger than even he expected. While Harry, Hermione and Ron vanished on their mission, Neville remained behind. He didn't hide, he didn't escape. He stood and took the blows. Each act of defiance against the Carrows was a thread in a tapestry of bravery that would define his future. But resistance has a cost, and Neville bore it with bruises, split lips and bloodied knuckles. He was punished not just for his actions, but for what he represented. a stubborn refusal to be broken. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Neville recounts the horrors of that year. The Carrows, allowed unchecked authority by Voldemort's regime, tortured students in the name of discipline. "They used the Cruciatus curse," Neville said grimly. "On kids! I refuse to do it." This refusal came with consequences, and yet, amid these cruelties, something strange happened. Neville was removed from their immediate reach, not sent home, not expelled, but quietly reassigned, as if someone in power had intervened. The books provide a sliver of truth that the films never showed. In Chapter 29, The Lost Diadem, Neville reveals, "They beat me and Carrow nearly choked Ginny when she came back from Easter, but it was Snape who gave us this room. He knew they wouldn't be able to get in." This is a fleeting, easily missed moment, but it reveals something monumental. Snape was not the tyrant he pretended to be. He was guarding them quietly and carefully, and his protection did not end with granting them a secret room. Neville had always been a thorn in Snape's side, or so it seemed. He was forgetful, slow with potions, and terrified of the professor's looming presence. But even that fear was part of a greater illusion. Snape's disdain was a mask he wore as much for the Death Eaters as for Dumbledore. What he truly felt toward Neville may never be known in full, but his actions suggest something more than contempt. They hint at pity, perhaps even admiration, because Neville refused to yield, and Snape, deep beneath layers of bitterness and grief, respected that. When the Carrows began to escalate their punishments, Snape intervened in a way only he could. He didn't defend Neville publicly. He didn't confront the Carrows head-on. He couldn't. Any sign of disloyalty would have cost him his life and ruined the greater plan. But what he could do was redirect Neville away from danger. Under the pretext of academic reassignment, Snape placed him in the greenhouses where Professor Sprout could watch over him, far from the classrooms where curses flew as freely as chalk dust. This change was never dramatized in the films. No music swelled, no montage played. But the implications of this quiet transfer speak volumes. The greenhouses became a sanctuary. There, Neville could continue resisting in subtler ways. There, he could grow stronger, not just in magic, but in resolve. And there, shielded from the worst of the Carrows' wrath, he survived long enough to lead Dumbledore's army once more and deliver the final blow to Voldemort's soul by killing Nagini. Snape's intervention becomes even more poignant when one remembers that Neville was the other possibility, the child born at the end of July, the one who might have been the chosen one. Voldemort chose Harry, but Neville bore the weight of prophecy in silence. Snape knew this. He knew that had fate tilted slightly, it would have been Neville's mother who died at Voldemort's hand. It could have been Neville who grew up an orphan. Perhaps in some small way Snape saw this. Perhaps knowing how much he had once begged to save a mother, he offered her son a sliver of safety in a world tearing itself apart. Snape's protection was never perfect. It couldn't be. He had to keep his mask affixed at all times. He watched as students were hexed and humiliated. He endured their hatred and sharpened his own bitterness to disguise the sting of his helplessness. But the relocation of Neville was not a random act. It was calculated, timed, and done with as little noise as possible. The fewer who noticed, the safer Neville would be. That was how Snape operated, in shadows, behind curtains, with silences and half-truths. This single act of moving a boy from one class to another, so seemingly trivial, becomes enormous when viewed through the lens of survival. The Carrows had little restraint. Amicus, in particular, revelled in cruelty. If Neville had remained in their class, he would have been broken, or worse. Snape didn't stop them entirely, but he redirected the stream of their malice. He turned it just enough to save a life. Neville never thanked him. He couldn't. He didn't know. Snape wouldn't have accepted the gratitude anyway. That wasn't why he did it. His whole life had been one long penance. The help he gave wasn't for glory, wasn't even for acknowledgement. It was a payment, quiet, invisible, and heavy. And so, even after Snape's death, even after the truth came out, Neville's story lacked that final note of recognition. The one moment where he might have realized that the man he feared had once placed himself between a boy and a curse. Number 17. The Sectumsempra incident and Snape's guilt. Of all the moments that define Severus Snape's troubled soul, one remains curiously underplayed in the films. The moment when his own creation, Sectumsempra, turns against an innocent child, and he, the half-blood prince, must face the devastating consequences of his teenage brilliance. On screen, it's a blur of blood and panic, a single crimson instant when Draco Malfoy crumples to the floor and Snape rushes in like a dark angel to heal the wounds. But in the pages of the book, this scene becomes something else entirely. A powerful reckoning, a moment where past and present crash into each other, forcing Snape to confront the shadows of his own making. The moment begins in a place of adolescent recklessness. Harry, emboldened by success and lulled into trust by the handwritten scrawl of the half-blood prince, strikes out in a duel without knowing what he's casting. Sectumsempra, the words sound elegant, foreign, sharp like a blade. He whispers them without understanding their weight, and Draco bleeds, not metaphorically but literally, slashed as if by invisible swords, his chest tearing open under the force of a spell that carries violence within its very name. The bathroom is soaked in panic and blood, and Harry watches in horror, the reality of power cutting deeper than any hex could. But what the movie doesn't show is what happens next, not just Snape's arrival, but the raw, breathless urgency with which he acts. There is no pause, no scolding, no hesitation. He kneels beside Draco, murmuring an incantation Harry has never heard before. The blood ceases to pour, the wounds close, not perfectly, but enough. It's not just healing, it's reversal. A spell that counters something that should never have been. And Snape doesn't even need to ask where Harry learned it. He knows, because the spell is his signature, his scar on the world. Snape was the one who wrote the words, curled in the margins of a potions textbook during years of isolation and bitterness. The prince's spells were brilliant, clever, dangerous, potions perfected, jinxes improved, curses invented. And Sectumsempra stood above them all, a spell designed not to disarm or repel, but to maim. It was a teenager's cry for power, forged in resentment. And now, years later, that cry has echoed through the generations and found its way into Harry's hands, the son of James Potter, wielding the invention of Severus Snape. What the books make painfully clear is the moment of realization that dawns across Snape's face. Not just the horror that Draco might die, but the deeper private horror that he himself might be responsible. "I am the half-blood prince," he says later, but it's not a declaration of pride. It's a confession, a whisper of guilt wrapped in identity. For all his control, all his secrets, here lies proof that his own darkness still walks the world. It has taken on a life of its own, and it nearly killed a child. In Half-Blood Prince, the narrative lingers on the moment after the spell is cast. Snape orders Harry to hand over the textbook. Not just confiscation, not just discipline, but a desperate attempt to control what has already escaped. Harry, sensing this, hides the original and offers up a decoy. Snape, of course, sees through it. He isn't fooled. He never is. But he does not push further. He lets Harry go with a warning and no expulsion. This is not leniency. It's something deeper. A protection that is hard to explain unless one knows Snape's full story. It's important to remember that this takes place before Harry knows the truth, before he knows about Lily, before he understands what Snape has sacrificed. And yet Snape shields him. In this single moment, the bitterness of their rivalry is eclipsed by something older, something that cannot be spoken, a guilt that blooms in silence. Snape, who spent years inventing weapons in the margins of his books, now watches one wound a boy he once swore to protect. Whether it's Draco or Harry that he saves that day doesn't matter. In truth, he saves them both, from the worst of himself. What the films leave out is the depth of Snape's anguish, not the visible kind, Snape never weeps, never trembles, but the inward collapse. The understanding that something he created, perhaps in a moment of youthful rage, has the power to ruin lives. In the book, the counter-curse he uses is never named, never explained. That's the point. No one else could have healed those wounds. No one else would even know where to begin, because no one else made them. Sectumsempra was more than a spell. It was a symbol of how close brilliance can come to cruelty, of how pain can be embedded in ink and Latin and youthful vengeance. Snape, the boy who loved a girl who would never love him back, turned to books to write himself into power. The Half-Blood Prince is not just a persona. He's a ghost that haunts the real man. A ghost that for one terrible moment rises in the form of slashing wounds across Draco Malfoy's chest. Yes. And it is perhaps this that drives Snape to silence afterward. He does not explain the spell to Dumbledore. He does not punish Harry severely. He cannot bring himself to. The shame is too raw, because he recognizes the boy's temptation, the thrill of forbidden knowledge, the hunger to be stronger. Snape once walked that road, and he knows where it leads. There's a kind of tragic poetry in the idea that Snape, this guarded, sarcastic man who lives in shadows, created something too powerful for even himself to control. The books reveal that Sectumsempra wasn't just used once. It was developed, tested, and its full potential, its full danger, was something even Snape could not anticipate. The film avoids this moral complexity. It shows only a flash of blood and Snape's cure, but not the weight, not the soul-deep tremor of a man who sees a piece of himself in a dying boy. Number 18. "Look at me," his last words. The air was thick with dust and screams. Amid the chaos of Hogwarts' final battle, amid crumbling stone and flickering spells, Severus Snape bled alone on the floor of the shrieking shack. Voldemort had ordered Nagini to strike, and the serpent had obeyed with vicious precision. As Snape gasped for air, his lifeblood soaked the wooden floorboards beneath him. He did not cry out for help. He did not curse his fate. Instead, he beckoned Harry Potter closer, not with pride, not with bitterness, but with a single desperate wish burning behind his dark eyes. In the movie adaptation, this moment is reduced to a quiet, fleeting exchange, a whisper, a look, oh bye. Vial of memories. The urgency, the emotion, the depth of the moment is softened, diluted, but in the book, J.K. Rowling gave Snape's final breath a powerful and haunting truth. He asked Harry to look at him, not as a dying man, but as someone who had never truly lived except in the shadow of one woman's memory. "Look at me," he said, not for comfort, not for validation, but because Lily Evans's eyes lived on in her son, and Snape, in the final seconds of his life, longed to see them one last time. It was not a casual request. It was not mere sentimentality. It was the culmination of decades of concealed devotion, sacrifice, and unspoken agony. For all the grand battles and heroic feats of the series, those three words, "look at me," stand among the most human and heartbreaking ever. Written in the Wizarding World. In the film Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, Snape's death is portrayed with visual restraint. He slides to the floor, whispers for Harry to take his tears, and lies still. The framing focuses on the act of transferring memories, on Harry's stunned face, on the eerie silence surrounding the moment. The camera lingers just long enough to show Snape's vulnerability, but the weight of his final words is largely left unspoken. Viewers unfamiliar with the book miss the most intimate detail. Snape's death is not simply about passing information to Harry, it's about seeing Lily's eyes alive in her son's face before closing his own forever. In Rowling's original text, Snape's death scene is drenched in raw emotion. Harry, Ron, and Hermione arrive too late to save him. Voldemort has already struck. The narrative brings us into a tight, suffocating space, not just physically, but emotionally. There was a terrible scream, Rowling writes, a sound of horror and remorse, a noise of someone who could not bear what he was seeing. This is not Harry's scream, it is Snape's, silent in the film but thunderous in the book. It reveals a man whose final action is not to fight, not to defend himself, but to feel, and what he feels is not fear of death, but an overwhelming need to connect. Snape did not ask Harry for forgiveness. He did not try to explain his actions. He did not confess, apologize, or boast. He had only one plea, to look into the eyes that reminded him of Lily. For years, he had protected Harry not out of affection for the boy, but because of love for his mother. That love had survived humiliation, rejection, and death. It had become the silent engine driving his every move. When Dumbledore asked, "After all this time?" and Snape answered, "Always," he did not mean loyalty to a cause or an institution. He meant Lily. That singular, enduring love defined his life and, ultimately, his death. The simplicity of his final request is deceptive. "Look at me" sounds almost ordinary, but within it lies the full weight of Snape's character. It is the request of a man who has spent a lifetime hiding behind masks, of cruelty, of indifference, of sarcasm, and who, in his final moment, strips all of it away. It is his one act of vulnerability, his last exposure, no longer Professor Snape, no longer the spy, just a man who once loved a girl and never stopped. The tragedy of the film's portrayal is not just in what it omits, but in what it fails to understand. The camera gives us a moment, but not a soul. It gives us a death, but not the reason behind the tears. Without those three words, "look at me," viewers may interpret the scene as functional, a plot device to deliver memories to Harry. But with those words, the scene becomes deeply personal. It reveals that Snape was not motivated by strategy or revenge. His final act was love. Not romanticized love, not victorious love, but painful, unfulfilled love that defined the shape of his entire life. The eyes of Lily Evans were green. They were Harry's inheritance. Every time Snape looked at the boy, he saw the one person who had shown him kindness. The girl who stood up for him when no one else would. The girl he drove away with cruel words. The girl he mourned more than anyone else. To die without seeing those eyes one last time would be unbearable. And so he whispered, "Look at me," hoping for a final flicker of her presence in Harry's gaze. This moment is made even more poignant by Snape's history. As a child, Severus Snape lived in a miserable home. His father was abusive, his mother distant. He escaped into magic, found solace in Lily Evans, and for the first time felt connection. At Hogwarts, his genius alienated him. He fell in with dark crowds, made terrible choices, and let bitterness consume him. But through it all, he carried a quiet torch for the girl with auburn hair. When she died, he broke, and from that brokenness emerged his most noble form, a double agent risking everything, every day, for the sake of her memory. There are few moments in literature as devastating as Snape's death when seen through the lens of his entire story. It is not a grand finale, it is not cinematic fireworks, it is small, tender, full of aching silence. It is a man dying not for glory, but for a ghost. And when Harry later enters the Pensieve and sees Snape's memories, the truth unravels like a requiem. The Patronus in the form of a doe, the trembling hand clutching Lily's letter, the desperate question, hide them all then, keep them safe. And above all, the image of him cradling her dead body, his face twisted in unspeakable grief. "Look at me" is the closing note to that requiem. a final chord echoing the pain of loss, the weight of regret, and the yearning for redemption. It reframes everything. It turns a feared professor into a man capable of great sorrow. It exposes the human beneath the harsh surface. And it connects him, at last, to the boy he spent years misunderstanding and protecting in equal measure. Harry understood. That is why in the end he chose to name one of his sons Albus Severus. "You were named after 2 headmasters of Hogwarts," he tells his child. "One of them was a Slytherin, and he was the bravest man I ever knew. Not because Snape saved the wizarding world with a wand, but because he bore the unbearable for love, because he lived in disguise, in sacrifice, and died without ever." Hearing the words he most needed. The omission of "look at me" from the film is not a mere screenwriting choice. It is the removal of the final thread in Snape's tapestry. It is the quiet removal of the scene's deepest colour. In a story so attuned to symbolism, to the weight of glances and the meaning of eyes, the decision to omit the line cuts away something essential. Rowling wrote it with purpose. It was not filler. It was the essence of the moment. And for those who read the book, it remains unforgettable. Snape's love for Lily was not perfect. It was selfish at times, obsessive, even destructive, but it was real. And real love in fiction is rarely clean or easy. It is messy, painful, and full of contradiction. That's what made his character so compelling. That's what gave those 3 final words such gravity. He was not asking Harry for salvation. He was not asking to be remembered as a hero. He simply wanted to look into the eyes of the only person who ever made him feel alive, even if only by reflection. The film robbed him of that. It softened the jagged edge of his goodbye. It offered closure, but not truth. It left audiences with a sense of loss without telling them what had been lost. For a character who had lived so much of his life in shadows, the book offered him a light at the end, a brief, piercing moment of clarity and humanity. The movie gave him a death, the book gave him a soul. Snape's story is a tragedy not because he died, but because he lived unloved, misunderstood, and alone. And in those last seconds all he wanted was to see Lily's eyes, not her forgiveness, not her voice, just her eyes, the eyes that had once looked at him with kindness, the eyes he had ruined his life trying to honour. "Look at me," he whispered, as the world dimmed around him. And Harry did. For once, not as an enemy, not as a boy with a scar, but as the last witness to a man's final, unspoken prayer. Number 19, the Half-Blood Prince's hidden identity. Of all the objects that passed through Harry Potter's hands during his 6 years at Hogwarts, few are as quietly significant as a battered old potions textbook, its spine cracked, its margins thick with annotations, and its identity cloaked in mystery. This book becomes more than a tool for academic success. It becomes a mirror into the soul of one Severus Snape. In the film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, this magical relic is introduced, acknowledged, and then swiftly diminished. The identity of the Half-Blood Prince is revealed without ceremony, and no time is spared for the emotional weight behind the pseudonym. The book becomes just another prop, the reveal just another plot point. But in the novel, J.K. Rowling turns the Half-Blood Prince's textbook into a symbol of adolescent trauma, concealed identity, and unspoken brilliance. The movie adaptation stripped away that humanity, leaving a hollow shell where once there had been a boy named Severus, finding refuge in ink and invention. When Harry discovers the old book in Professor Slughorn's class, it seems like a lucky accident. He grabs a random copy off the shelf after Ron takes his preferred textbook. From the start, the pages seem to breathe with life. Instructions are rewritten, ingredients adjusted, and new spells scribbled in the margins. Harry, who has always struggled in potions under Snape's sneering eye, suddenly excels. Slughorn is impressed. Ron is amazed. Hermione is suspicious. What no one realizes is that Harry isn't just reading a textbook, he's reading a boy's diary in code, a silent autobiography written by a student who once sat in the same classroom, yearning to be more than his circumstances. The spells in the book are clever, often dangerous. Sectumsempra, designed for enemies, slices open flesh with invisible force. Levicorpus lifts bodies by the ankle, leaving them dangling in the air. A spell, Harry soon learns, was once used on Snape himself in front of jeering marauders. There's a poetic horror in realizing the half-blood prince created the same magic that humiliated him, turning it into a tool of his own power. These annotations aren't just notes, they are survival strategies. They are revenge fantasies. They are the coded scribbles of a mind that refused to be forgotten. The films ignore this haunting resonance. In the movie, Levicorpus becomes just another trick. Sectumsempra is never tied to Snape's own trauma. The emotional fingerprints vanish. Harry grows fond of the book before he knows who wrote it. He treats it like a trusted mentor, mimicking its advice with religious devotion. He defends it against Hermione's criticism, even as she warns him that magic so dark must come from someone dangerous. In the book, this builds toward a dramatic tension. Who was this prince? How did he know so much? Why does he remain anonymous? The reveal in the film is abrupt. Snape declares, "I am the half-blood prince," as if it matters little, as if the title was a mere label, and not a lifeline to a forgotten past. In Rowling's pages, the truth shatters Harry. The truth was that Harry had been helped all year by a man he loathed, the text reads, a man who had betrayed his parents. The betrayal is personal. It turns admiration into disgust and trust into ash. Snape's identity as the half-blood prince is rooted in heartbreak and heritage. His mother, Eileen Prince, gave him the name. It's a tribute, not just a moniker. His father, Tobias Snape, was a cruel muggle, and Severus's use of the prince name is a rejection of his paternal bloodline. It's an embrace of magic, of his mother's legacy, of the parts of him that were proud and capable before the world told him otherwise. The name is a defiance, a creation of a persona who can endure ridicule and loneliness. The movies never once mention Eileen Prince. The personal cost behind the name is buried. The teenage boy who invented spells and rewrote recipes is lost beneath Alan Rickman's adult gravitas. When Harry tries Sectumsempra on Draco Malfoy, it is not with malice, it is with panic and self-defense. But the spell's brutality shocks even Harry. Blood gushes, Malfoy crumples. In the aftermath, Snape arrives like a storm. He heals Draco without hesitation, but it's the look in his eyes, controlled fury, trembling pain, that the book paints so vividly. He knows this spell, he wrote this spell, and it has now wounded a student just as it was designed to wound his own enemies long ago. He asks Harry, where did you learn this? And Harry, sensing danger, lies. This moment is pivotal. In the book, Snape demands the source not because he suspects plagiarism, but because he fears what Harry might uncover about his past. The film captures none of this urgency. The confrontation becomes routine, the emotion muted. No one watching truly understands why Snape is shaken. Hermione's warnings take on new meaning when the book's author is revealed. She has always been cautious, preferring rules to intuition, books to improvisation. She suspects that the prince is dangerous because his spells are elegant but cruel. Her unease is prophetic, but it's also contrasted against Harry's emotional attachment to the book, which feels more intimate than he's willing to admit. In the novel, he hides the book in the room of requirement, fearing both punishment and truth. He covers it with a bust, a wig, and a dusty tiara, the very Horcrux he will seek in the next volume. Symbolically, he buries the prince, just as Snape once buried his true self beneath a cold exterior. This moment does not appear in the film. The hiding of the book becomes perfunctory, not poetic. Snape, as the half-blood prince, is more than just an author of margin notes. He is a boy who found refuge in magic when the world gave him nothing else. He was mocked, isolated, and dismissed. His brilliance went unseen because it came wrapped in poverty and bitterness. The textbook, filled with corrections and inventions, becomes his voice. In it, he is not Tobias's beaten son or Lily's rejected suitor. He is the prince, the master of his domain. This book is property of the half-blood prince, it reads in curling script. It's not just ownership, it's identity, a quiet declaration that he mattered. The movie treats this as trivia. When Dumbledore dies and Snape flees Hogwarts, Harry confronts him. In the novel, Snape doesn't just escape, he erupts. Harry hurls jinx after jinx, demanding answers, and when he screams, "Fight back, you coward!" Snape turns with fury and says, "Don't call me coward." It's not just about that moment. It's about every moment. About every time he was humiliated, beaten, unloved. The fire in his voice is not adult rage, it's teenage anguish resurfacing. This emotion, too, is diluted in the film. It becomes a line in the dark, not a cry from the soul. Rowling's version of the Half-Blood Prince isn't just a mystery, it's a tragedy. A boy invents a persona to survive, to find pride, to separate himself from the pain of his Muggle father and the loss of his only friend, Lily. That persona, once so vital, becomes dangerous when left unchecked. The spells he creates reflect a bruised psyche. The secrecy reflects shame. The book is an artifact of self-protection. Harry's eventual revulsion towards it mirrors Snape's own self-loathing. The narrative becomes cyclical. One boy rejecting another without realizing how alike they are. The movie touches none of this. It moves on. The fact that Snape chose not to reveal himself as the prince is not cowardice, it is grief. To admit authorship would be to revisit the pain, the memories of dark corridors and whispered slurs. In the book, he keeps that secret until the moment Harry forces it out of him. And even then, it's not pride that fuels the confession. It's anger. Rage that the boy who looks like James but loves like Lily would dare use his private magic without understanding it. The movie simplifies this to a dramatic beat. The weight is lost. Snape's relationship with his mother, Eileen Prince, is absent from the films. Yet it is she who gave him his name, she who gave him his place in the wizarding world. Tobias Snape, a muggle with a temper, loomed over his childhood like a storm. But Eileen, though distant, was his lineage, his legacy. By choosing to identify as Prince, Severus aligns himself with the only part of his family that gave him pride. The films never speak her name. Her absence speaks volumes. The Prince's book is full of trial and error, scribbled over lines, crossed out spells, new versions perfected in the margins. This is not arrogance, it's perseverance. A boy refusing to accept what he's been taught because he believes he can do better. It mirrors Hermione's intellect, but with more rebellion, more fire, more need. And when Harry realizes he's been learning from Snape all along, he recoils, not because the magic was faulty, but because he's forced to face the contradiction. How can the man who hated his father also be the mind that helped him excel? There is something tragic in knowing that Harry only discovers the full truth about Snape after his death. Only when he views the memories does he understand the prince's pain, his loss, his choices. In that light, the old textbook becomes a ghost, one that tried to guide him, even if its author could not. The movie never ties these threads together. The textbook becomes irrelevant once the name is known, but in the book it remains a symbol of misunderstanding, of invisible mentorship, of unspoken sorrow. Even the spells themselves carry emotional echoes. Sectumsempra is brutal, but it's also desperate. It's not a soldier's spell, it's a victim's. It is magic made in isolation, born of fury and fear. Levicorpus is humorous, but it hides cruelty. Muffliato, used to fill ears with buzzing so conversations remain private, reflects a boy who had secrets to keep. These aren't just clever tricks, they are psychological scars turned into syntax. Every margin note bleeds. Snape's story is one of erasure, misunderstood by students, distrusted by colleagues, hated by the very child he protected. The Half-Blood Prince was his attempt to exist beyond that erasure. And yet even in death, the films hurried past his truth. The book remains, silent, dusty, buried beneath a wig and a tiara, waiting for someone to read between the lines. Number 20, the slap that never reached the screen. During the final moments of Hogwarts' most desperate hour, while the castle trembled under the weight of war and its ancient stones echoed with cries of pain, bravery emerged from unexpected corners. Among the flying curses and collapsing towers, the truth of many hearts was laid bare. Some stood taller than ever, and some, like Severus Snape, were finally revealed in their full complexity. But there is a moment, a painfully brief and burning scene from the book that the films chose to bury, a moment that could have transformed the perception of Snape in a single breath, the slap he delivered to Alecto Carrow. It was not a random gesture, nor a burst of anger. It was a layered, deliberate act, desperate yet controlled, reckless yet restrained, filled with symbolic weight and narrative importance. Snape, who for so long had seemed cold, calculating and distant from both sides of the war, allowed a crack to appear in his mask at that precise second. This act wasn't for the Order nor for Voldemort. It was for the children of Hogwarts. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Alecto Carrow, one of Voldemort's most vicious followers and the sadistic sibling of Amicus Carrow, had taken delight in punishing students during her time as a professor at Hogwarts. Her specialty was the dark arts, not defense against them. In her twisted hands, the classroom became a chamber of torment where students were forced to perform the Cruciatus Curse on one another as a form of discipline, torture, humiliation, pain. These were her teaching tools. And on that night, when the battle was brewing and the storm outside was nothing compared to the terror within the stone walls, Alecto prepared once more to make a lesson of cruelty. But she miscalculated. She thought Snape would support her, that he would turn a blind eye as he often appeared to do. She was wrong. When she raised her wand against the students, Snape's reaction was immediate. The book says, there was a loud crack as Snape's hand met Alecto's face. She reeled, her wand falling from her hand. That sound, that crack of flesh against flesh, echoed louder than any scream. It was not merely a slap, it was a rebuke of everything the Carrows represented. It was a line drawn in the darkness. This moment carries immense emotional weight, because it was the only time in the entire saga where Snape physically and openly defended the students, not subtly, not secretly, not in whispers behind closed doors, but publicly and explosively. He did it knowing full well that his position as headmaster, his delicate cover, and his own life were now at risk. There was no going back after that slap. Snape's entire journey is built on contradiction and concealment. To the world he is a Death Eater, to Voldemort he is a trusted double agent, to the Order he is a bitter necessity. But in truth he is none of these entirely. His loyalty lies not in ideology but in love, twisted, haunting and unyielding. Protecting students was never part of his assigned role, yet when the moment came, he chose them. He chose to act. Films erase this choice. By omitting this scene, they deny viewers one of the only unambiguous acts of compassion and courage Snape ever performs in plain sight. It was not a spy's move, nor a ploy. It was not part of Dumbledore's grand plan. It was a man watching a woman about to torture children and stepping in no matter the cost. It was humanity at its most raw and dangerous. To understand the gravity of this moment, consider who Alecto Carrow is. She is no mere foot soldier in Voldemort's army. She is a fanatic, someone who would not hesitate to cruciate a first year for mispronouncing a spell. Her brother Amicus once tried to throw a student from a balcony. These were not educators, they were tormentors. And Snape, who had endured suspicion from students and faculty alike, stood between them and real present harm. There is something deeply Shakespearean about Snape's gesture. a man playing a role he despises, caught in a web of allegiance and deception, making a spontaneous decision that jeopardizes everything. His silence has always been his shield, but in that moment he broke it. Not with words, but with action. He exposed a fragment of his true self. This scene is one of the rare times where Snape is neither cryptic nor cold. He doesn't hiss sarcasm or offer bitter comments. He doesn't pretend to ignore what is happening. He acts. The slap is a cry, a rebellion against the very system he has pretended to uphold. It is a refusal to let cruelty continue under his roof, under his watch, even if the world still sees him as the villain. And it's not just about protecting the students, it's about restoring a fragment of his own shattered dignity. Snape knows the students hate him. He knows they believe the worst of him. But maybe, just maybe, this act was his way of telling them, "You're not alone, not entirely. I'm still here." He doesn't wait for thanks. He doesn't demand understanding. He does what must be done and walks away. This moment also serves as a contrast to other authority figures who failed. The ministry caved. The Board of Governors let Death Eaters teach. Many professors, though noble, could do little under such oppression. But Snape struck a Death Eater in the face, in Hogwarts, in front of witnesses. That is not subtle resistance. That is open defiance, however brief it may be. It is also important to acknowledge the psychological war Snape was fighting. He was walking a razor's edge, trying to maintain Voldemort's trust while sabotaging his efforts from within. Every action was calculated, every word mattered, but sometimes something breaks through calculation, something too urgent, too human. That slap was one of those breaks. Imagine the scene in a film, the tension in the classroom, Alecto's wand raised, the fear in the eyes of children. And then Snape steps forward, calm but tight-jawed, and delivers the slap. Alecto gasps. The room freezes. Snape stands over her, not with anger, but with silent command. That would have been one of the most unforgettable images in the entire franchise, but it never happened on screen. Instead, the film chose to skip this moment entirely. It streamlined Snape's character into a quiet martyr, noble only in death. But the book shows otherwise. Snape's nobility was not just in dying for the cause, it was in living for it, protecting innocence, even when they spat on his name, even when it meant becoming the villain in every story, but his own. This moment also fits into a larger theme Rowling crafted, that bravery comes in many forms. Neville with the sword, McGonagall, dueling giants, Molly Weasley protecting her daughter, and Snape raising his hand not in cruelty but in protection. It's not less heroic because it lacks spectacle. In some ways it is more heroic because it is quiet and personal and done with no hope of recognition. The omission of this scene is part of a broader pattern in the films where nuance is sacrificed for clarity. But Snape is not a character of clarity. He is a man built from shadows and contradictions. Moments like the slap do not confuse his arc, they complete it. They show us not just what he died for, but what he lived for. In the end, Snape's gesture remains hidden in the pages of the book, waiting for readers to uncover. It is a secret act of resistance, a quiet cry of justice, a whisper in a room full of screams. It's easy to remember Snape as the man who loved Lily. It's harder, but more rewarding, to remember him as the man who once slapped a Death Eater to protect a group of frightened children and never told anyone why. Number 21. Snape's life of isolation after Lily's death. In the flickering light of his underground chamber, Severus Snape sat alone, a shadow among shadows, his fingers tracing the margin of an ancient textbook as if it were a memory he could hold on to. The pages bore the faint scent of old ink and bitter herbs, but more than that, they bore the whispers of his solitude. The films never took us there. They never lingered in the suffocating quiet of his dungeon when no one called his name, when no one came knocking. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the book casually mentions that Snape spent long hours hunched over cauldrons and scrawled cryptic instructions in his old potions book. But behind those annotations was a man who spoke to no one because there was no one left to speak to. After Lily Evans died, Severus did not simply mourn her. He became entombed in his own grief, a walking monument to a love unfulfilled and a guilt that gnawed through every minute of his existence. The films, ever hungry for pace and action, left behind the hollow rhythm of his footsteps echoing in the dungeon corridors, left behind the clatter of a single teacup at his desk, the only sound breaking through his self-imposed silence. In the book, he never had friends, never shared meals in the great hall with conversation. He existed outside the flow of normal life, a ghost in black robes with no audience and no comfort. His old textbook, hidden behind classroom cabinets and carried like a relic, was not merely a tool for brewing superior potions. It was a diary without confession, a journal where he rewrote the world in margins because he couldn't rewrite his past. This book is property of the half-blood prince, not Severus Snape, not the boy who once laughed at Lily's jokes in the shade of the birch trees in Cokeworth, but a persona designed to be both powerful and invisible. He scribbled new spells like Sectumsempra, not for fame but because he had no one to listen to his brilliance anymore. His mind became his only companion, his only witness. The moment Harry found that book, it was as if he were trespassing into a tomb. But even then the film turned it into a mystery, a plot device, never pausing to breathe in the sadness of a life lived in ink and secrets. The book gave us glimpses, the silence in the dungeon, the books stacked like barriers between Snape and the rest of the staff, the meals he often took alone. No colleagues visited, no students lingered. There were no personal effects in his quarters, no sign of warmth, just rows of vials, ingredients sorted with surgical precision, and the stillness of a man who had chosen to bury his heart. The only person who ever truly saw Severus was Albus Dumbledore, and even that was through the filtered lens of strategy. Their relationship, as revealed in Deathly Hallows, was not one of friendship but of mutual exploitation cloaked in necessity. "You disgust me," Snape once told Dumbledore when asked to protect Harry, and yet he obeyed, because love does not need to be pure to be enduring. But once that promise was made, his world shrank even further. He could no longer afford trust. Every word he spoke, every lesson he taught, had to be filtered, calculated. No time for companionship, no room for affection. He became the man with the impenetrable mask, one that the audience never truly saw, slip in the films until it was far too late. The books gave us more. They showed us the nights when Snape patrolled the corridors, not just out of duty, but because he had no one waiting for him in his quarters. The flickering torches cast his shadow like a spectre, a guardian of a castle full of children he could never allow himself to protect openly. He marked detentions but never offered second chances. He gave harsh grades but never favourites. This wasn't cruelty, it was distance, a protective layer forged not for his sake, but for Harry's. He had to be hated to stay hidden. He had to be isolated to be loyal. There's a brief passage in The Order of the Phoenix where Harry sees Snape's office, a room of glass jars, pickled creatures and dark corners. The walls are stone, damp with years of neglect, and the desk bears only a few personal notes. There is no sign of comfort, no fire roaring, no windows to the world. What kind of man chooses such a life unless he has nothing left to lose? That room was not just a workspace. It was a mausoleum to what once was and can never be again. The films showed it briefly, without weight, without sorrow. But in the books it stood as a testament to how a man can die while still breathing. Even the staff seemed to sense that Snape did not belong. He wasn't invited to social occasions, wasn't seen laughing in the courtyard or dining with Hagrid. He remained apart. Perhaps Minerva McGonagall respected him, but from a distance. Perhaps Flitwick nodded politely in corridors, but nothing more. They couldn't see his loyalty because it was cloaked in disdain. The burden of a double life crushed his ability to reach out. The moment Lily died, Severus stopped being a person and became a purpose. The only room where his presence felt alive was in the potions classroom. There, surrounded by ingredients and formulae, he could disappear into the familiar hum of alchemical transformation. It was control, order, and memory. He taught with sharpness because it was the only power he could safely wield. But even then he found little joy. When Hermione showed promise, he brushed her off. When Harry excelled under the prince's notes, Snape recoiled. Every reminder of what he could have passed down to his own child had life taken a different turn, only twisted the knife deeper. The films never showed Snape alone with Lily's photograph. They never showed him holding on to any relic of her beyond the Patronus scene at the end. But in the Deathly Hallows, the memory Harry sees is clear. After all this time? Always. That wasn't just a poetic line, it was the central truth of his existence. He loved her when they were children, when she chose James, when she died, and every miserable day after. But love didn't heal him. It turned his life into a long vigil, and solitude was the price he paid for redemption. The tragedy is not only that he was alone, but that he chose to remain that way. The opportunity to open his heart again never truly came, or perhaps he never believed he deserved it. Each student he taught was a reminder of what he'd lost. Each year at Hogwarts was another marker in his sentence, another cycle of remembering the girl who once called him Sev, and who died calling someone else's name. The films glanced over this emotional prison. They painted him as bitter and later noble. But they missed the man who ate in silence and lived in shadows. When Snape took the position of headmaster in the Deathly Hallows, he did not bask in power. He ruled over a haunted castle, turned prison, with Carrows on either side and students tortured for breathing wrong. Yet he stayed. And even then, he was alone. No trusted advisers, no loyal lieutenants. Just him, weighing the lives of children against the promise he made to a ghost. No scenes in the movie show him collapsing at night, trembling at what he must allow to maintain his cover. But the books suggest it. His actions, his silences, his hesitations all speak of a man broken a long time ago. In the final act of his life, Snape does not try to run. He does not attempt to justify himself. He dies quietly, without witnesses to his agony except the boy who inherited the eyes of the only person he ever loved. The moment when he asks Harry to look at him is not about forgiveness. It is about one last glimpse of Lily, a flash of memory before the darkness takes him. The films captured that moment, yes, but without the long shadow of his solitude, without the years of loneliness built brick by brick in the dungeon, it felt like a footnote. In truth, it was the final word of a story that began in loss and ended in silence. His legacy was not built on victories, but on sacrifices no one ever saw. The books left room for the reader to imagine the quiet hours, the long evenings where he wrote new spells not for fame, but for distraction. He lived in a castle filled with magic, yet his world was grey and still. Each day he taught students who would never understand him, under portraits that never nodded in respect, alongside ghosts who could not haunt him more than Lily already did. His life was not a tale of triumph. It was a vigil that lasted decades. It is easy to honour Snape for his bravery, to weep at always, but it is harder to sit with the ache of his choices. He was a man who built a prison out of loyalty and called it penance. He became invisible on purpose. In his quietest moments, he was not planning, not spying, he was remembering. A walk by the Black Lake, a letter Lily wrote when they were 12, the smell of honeysuckle in summer. These were the things he guarded more fiercely than any magical secret. And yet no one ever asked what he did on his birthdays or what he felt when he saw Harry laughing with friends. Severus Snape's story was one of immense loneliness. and the books made sure we felt it. Every cold sentence, every unexplained cruelty, every midnight patrol. They all pointed to a man whose soul had become an echo. The films gave us moments, but not the hours between them. They offered us the image of the hero, but not the cost of becoming one. And it is in those missing hours, in those invisible tears shed in the dark, that the real tragedy of Severus Snape lives. Number 22, a hero with no recognition. Of all the haunting legacies left behind after the fall of Voldemort, none is more quietly heartbreaking than the forgotten courage of Severus Snape. He stood in the shadows while others basked in the light of victory. He bled in silence while others received honors and statues. When the dust settled and the ministry began to tally its heroes, his name was not among them, not in the books, not in the films. Even in Harry Potter's final moments of reflection, Snape's bravery is whispered rather than celebrated. A single line from Harry, one of the bravest men I ever knew, is spoken in private, without audience, without echo. The films choose not to give this line any weight beyond a passing sentiment, and the books end without any public redemption. Snape remains a traitor to most. But behind that silence lies a story of immeasurable sacrifice. He lived a double life so dangerous it would crush most men within days. As a member of the Death Eaters, he was privy to Voldemort's most twisted plans, often standing only feet away from the most evil wizard of the age. But every word he spoke, every nod he gave, had to be calculated, not for self-preservation, but for protection. Dumbledore entrusted him with intelligence so vital that any misstep would mean the death of countless innocents. In one chilling example, Snape discovered Voldemort's plan to retrieve the prophecy from the Department of Mysteries and relayed it, setting off a chain of events that ultimately led to Sirius Black's death. That moment was a tragic misstep, but one made not from malice, but from operating within an impossible position. His loyalty to Dumbledore never wavered, even when his heart broke under the weight of mistakes. Perhaps the most underrepresented aspect of Snape's role in the final victory is his position at Hogwarts during the year it was controlled by Death Eaters. The films simplify this period, painting Snape as a passive, brooding headmaster presiding over cruelty. But the truth is far more complex. Snape spent that entire year performing an excruciating balancing act, maintaining the appearance of loyalty to Voldemort while secretly protecting students from the Carrows, the sadistic siblings who enforced the Dark Lord's rule. Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley and others formed Dumbledore's army again that year, and although they believed Snape to be their enemy, they were only able to survive because he allowed it. He prevented the worst punishments. He sent students into the Forbidden Forest instead of letting them fall under the Carrow's torture. He was the silent shield between the students and the abyss. One moment that captures the depth of Snape's self-denial comes when he hears of Harry's supposed capture and death in the Forbidden Forest. This isn't shown in the films, but in the books there's a sense of dread as Snape's final moves are forced into motion. He prepares to pass along the last crucial memory to Harry, the one that will reveal the truth about Voldemort's Horcruxes and Harry's connection to them. This is not an act of desperation, but of acceptance. Snape knows his death is near. He knows Voldemort's paranoia will kill him once the Dark Lord realizes the Elder Wand's power does not flow through its new master, and still he acts. Not for recognition, not for forgiveness, for the boy who carries Lily's eyes. The most devastating erasure of Snape's legacy occurs in the final scenes. After the war, Hogwarts is shown repairing itself, and the survivors gather to honor the fallen. Fred Weasley, Remus Lupin, Nymphadora Tonks all receive their rightful mourning. But Snape's body lies alone, perhaps in the Shrieking Shack, perhaps removed without ceremony. There is no statue, no portrait hung beside the other headmasters. No mention is made of his bravery to the public. The films do not show Harry defending Snape's name. They do not include the book's final detail that Harry named one of his children after Severus. Even then, it is a personal gesture, a private symbol of gratitude, not a public restoration of a stolen reputation. In truth, Snape's greatest contribution to Voldemort's defeat was not a single moment, but a sustained, soul-wrenching endurance. He protected the secret of Harry's connection to Voldemort for years. He delivered false intelligence to Voldemort. He bore the immense guilt of Lily's death and still chose to devote his life to protecting her son. He taught Harry Occlumency in a way so harsh and unkind it may have seemed sadistic, but in reality it was the only method available to keep Voldemort out of Harry's mind. When Harry failed, Snape redoubled his efforts, feeding Voldemort controlled truths and obscuring dangerous facts. One scene completely absent from the films occurs in The Pensive when Harry views Snape's memories. These moments are condensed in the adaptation, but in the books they span chapters. We see a man tormented by love, bound by guilt, and yet unwavering in purpose. "Look at me." Snape's last words to Harry are not a plea for recognition but for connection, to see Lily's eyes once more before the darkness claims him. This line, retained in the film, is given almost no emotional context, unless the viewer already knows its meaning. It lands without echo because the film fails to build the depth of Snape's inner torment. It is also not shown in the films that Snape was the one who provided the Sword of Gryffindor to Harry in the Forest of Dean. This moment is orchestrated through Phineas Nigellus Black's portrait and a doe-shaped Patronus the same as Lily's. Snape goes to great lengths to place the sword where Harry can find it, under Dumbledore's orders. But more importantly, he does it knowing Harry will never know who helped him. That Patronus, wordless, glowing, elegant, says more about Snape than any speech could. It is love, guilt, memory, and protection woven into a single spell. Snape's Patronus itself is a silent declaration. When Dumbledore asks, "After all this time?" and Snape responds, "Always," the entire weight of his character crystallizes in a word. It is not a romantic obsession, but a lifelong devotion, one that drives every choice he makes. The film includes this line but strips away its build-up. It is not enough to show a silver doe without exploring what it costs to summon one. Snape never loved again, never moved past Lily's death, never sought redemption through glory. His always is a vow made to himself and to her memory, to protect what she loved, to fight what killed her. Throughout the books, Dumbledore remains Snape's only confidant. Even members of the Order of the Phoenix distrust him. Molly Weasley despises him. Lupin barely tolerates him. McGonagall cannot forgive him. Snape accepts this with a grim understanding, that to preserve the plan he must be hated. That is the purest form of heroism. When he begs Dumbledore to hide them all then, referring to Lily and her family, it is a moment of vulnerability so rarely afforded to him. It is this same vulnerability that makes his story unbearable to witness and too complicated for the films to convey properly. Even in death, Snape is denied peace. He is never mentioned at the memorial. His portrait is not seen in the headmaster's office in the final scenes. In the epilogue, the world seems to have moved on. No tomb, no mention in the Daily Prophet, no ministry award. He dies a traitor in the public eye. The films choose spectacle over nuance. They do not show how Snape's body is treated. They do not give him a funeral. They do not let Harry speak to the wizarding world about the man who saved them all from the shadows. One specific moment of erasure in the films is the Battle of Hogwarts itself. Snape is killed before the fighting begins, denied even the chance to fight for the side he protected. In the books, this is intentional. Voldemort murders him in cold blood, believing the Elder Wand will shift allegiance, but in the films this is rushed. His death is a technicality, his memory a tool. There is no fallout, no reaction from the Hogwarts staff, no mourning. It is the coldest of ends for the warmest of souls, hidden beneath layers of bitterness and regret. Snape's redemption, such as it is, exists entirely in private. In the final book, Harry tells Voldemort that Snape was working against him, but the crowd hears little of it. It is not enough to cleanse his name. The films do not even show this scene properly. They make it about wand mechanics, not moral complexity. Snape's greatest punishment is not death, but anonymity. His worst fear, that he would die for a cause and remain misunderstood, comes true. The story of Severus Snape is the story of unseen battles. While others duelled in open halls, he fought alone in corridors, in his own mind, in the company of ghosts. He had no order to protect him, no family to lean on, no praise to motivate him. He chose the path of most resistance, knowing it led to nothing but a quiet death and a misunderstood life. He carried Lily's memory not as a burden but as a compass, and yet no monument marks his grave, no speech tells his tale. The wizarding world builds statues of auras and saints, but never of martyrs who wore black and were hated by those they saved. It is a profound moral question buried at the heart of Harry Potter's story. Can a man be a hero if no one calls him one? Snape's life answers with a painful yes. He knew the cost and paid it in full. His silence was not weakness. His cruelty was armor. His hatred, often exaggerated, was a tool. Every insult he threw at Harry was a shield. Every glare was a warning. Every sneer was a mask. When it slipped, it revealed a man drowning in grief, desperate to make amends in the only way he could. The films could have shown this. They could have added a single scene. Harry, standing before a black tombstone, whispering that the world got it wrong, or a Hogwarts memorial with Snape's name at the bottom, beneath the others, or a new portrait hung quietly in the headmaster's office. They did none of this. In the end, Snape's legacy belongs to the readers who saw past his bitterness and recognized the fire underneath, to those who understand that the measure of a man is not how many cheers follow his name, but how many lives he saves without ever asking for applause. Number 23. Love that was never understood. In the dim, suffocating shadows of the shrieking shack, Severus Snape lay dying. Blood oozed from the wounds Nagini had left behind, his black eyes fixed on Harry Potter's face with a desperation that was alien to a man who had spent a lifetime hiding his emotions behind a curtain of contempt. But even in that final moment, Snape did not ask for forgiveness. He didn't speak of regrets. He whispered only one word, a word that held an entire lifetime of agony. Always. For viewers of the films, this became a symbol, a meme, a romantic flourish that softened the edges of a hard man. But the truth buried in the books is infinitely more complex and infinitely more tragic. That single word was not the beginning of understanding, it was the tip of a vast, unseen glacier. What the films chose to compress into a tearful montage was, in the books, the beating heart of Severus Snape's character, a lifelong secret devotion to Lily Evans that defined his every decision, action, and sacrifice. In the books, the full extent of Snape's love is not something revealed with sweeping music or cinematic flair. It unfolds like a terrible confession, stitched together through memories, choices, and silent moments. The memory sequence in The Prince's Tale is not merely a plot device, it's an emotional reckoning. Through Dumbledore's pensive, Harry glimpses the truth, but even he, the boy at the center of it all, cannot fully grasp the immensity of what he is witnessing. The films gave us a romantic tragedy. The books gave us a man who lived a half-life in the name of a woman who died hating him, and he never stopped loving her. The core of Snape's love was never about hope. It was not the love of a man who believed he would win Lily back. It was not adorned with poetry or kind gestures. It was raw, almost punishing. When Snape joined the Death Eaters, he did so because he wanted to belong somewhere, anywhere. But when he discovered that the Dark Lord intended to kill Lily Potter, he fell to his knees, literally. He begged, not for the child, not for James, only for her. He told Voldemort, "I have asked you to spare her life." There was no greater act of humiliation for a man like Snape than to plead before the very master he served. He was ready to accept the deaths of her husband and child if only she could be saved. That is not heroism, it is obsession. It is a kind of twisted love that reveals the depth of his brokenness. And when Lily died anyway, Snape did not seek vengeance against Voldemort. He didn't renounce the Death Eaters because he believed in justice. He renounced them because the last tether to his heart had been severed. He went to Dumbledore not as a man seeking redemption, but as one who could not bear to live with what he had done. He told Dumbledore, "Hide them all then, keep them safe, please." And when Dumbledore questioned why he cared, Snape's voice broke as he replied, "Because it's her, can't you see? All this time, it's been her." That scene never made it to the screen. And without it, the nuance of his love is lost, his despair, his desperation, his guilt, all reduced to a single tear. And a whisper. Snape's decision to protect Harry was never about Harry himself. It was about Lily. Dumbledore understood that, and so did readers who paid close attention. In one of the most emotionally complex exchanges in the series, Dumbledore challenges Snape's supposed transformation. He says, "You disgust me." And Snape replies, "Expecto Patronum." A silver doe leaps from his wand, the same as Lily's. That one act, that conjuring of shared soul, is what convinces Dumbledore of the depth of Snape's love. It is this moment that confirms he is not acting from duty or guilt, but from enduring, undying love. The film shows this, but it does not explain it. Viewers see the doe, but they do not hear Dumbledore's gasp, nor the stunned realization, after all this time. Always. Those words are empty without context. They are not a romantic catchphrase. They are a scream in the dark from a man who never stopped mourning. Even when Snape became headmaster of Hogwarts with the entire world hating him, he did not falter. He protected students from the Carrows in secret. He passed crucial information to the Order. He played the role of the villain to protect the greater good. But at night, alone, he returned to the place where it all began, the house in Spinner's End. There, among the dust and silence, he lived as a ghost. Not a ghost of the war, but of a memory. A boy who had loved a girl and lost her. A man who carried that loss like a brand upon his soul. Harry never saw that. The films never showed it. But it haunts the pages of the books like a whisper in the margins. Snape's interactions with Harry were often cruel, but they were laced with contradiction. He saved Harry's life more than once, from Quirrell's jinx in the first book to the poisoned mead in the sixth. He brewed the Wolfsbane potion for Lupin. He worked tirelessly to keep Draco from becoming a murderer. He agreed to kill Dumbledore to spare Draco's soul, but he never asked for thanks, never demanded to be understood. And that perhaps is the cruelest tragedy of all. A man who gave everything, knowing that no one would ever see his truth, not even the boy who bore Lily's eyes. The film's portrayal of the final pensive sequence is elegant but incomplete. It skips over the years of suffering, the weight of Snape's choices, the agony of watching Harry grow up and knowing he would never be Lily's son in his eyes. The book makes it clear that Snape's grief was not healed by time. In one memory, he finds the Potter's house destroyed, walks past James's corpse without pause, and cradles Lily's dead body in a moment of unbearable tenderness. This is not shown in the film, but on the page it is described with such clarity that one cannot breathe while reading it. He knelt there like a man lost, and he held her and sobbed. This was not acting. This was truth. The fact that Snape continued to serve Dumbledore after that moment is not a sign of redemption, it is a sign of eternal mourning. His every step after that day was a funeral march. His life's mission became Harry's protection, not because he saw a son in him, but because Harry was Lily's legacy. He hated James. He hated what Harry represented, but he protected him because Lily would have wanted it. That is love, not the sweet, reciprocal kind, but the kind that corrodes and devours and still refuses to die. When Harry finally learns the truth, he is overwhelmed, but still he does not grasp it fully. He sees Snape's memories, he understands the sacrifices, but he does not feel the weight of those decades. That weight is for the reader alone. In the final book, after the battle is over, Harry tells his son that he named him Albus Severus and says, "He was the bravest man I ever knew." It is a kind tribute, but it is not understanding. Snape was not simply brave, he was broken. He was not merely loyal, he was in mourning. He was not just a protector, he was a man who lived and died for a single memory. Even the decision to die without revealing the truth directly to Harry is an act of love. Snape could have told him everything. He could have demanded recognition. Instead, he gave Harry his memories and turned away. He did not seek a witness to his pain. He did not want absolution. He wanted Lily to live again, even if it was only in the eyes of her son. That is why, in his final moment, he begs Harry to look at him. Not to remember him, not to forgive him, but to let him die looking into her eyes, those green eyes that haunted his dreams for decades. Snape's love was not pure, but it was real. It was not wise, but it was enduring. It was not kind, but it was selfless. The films chose to simplify this into a line and a tear. The books refused to let it be so easy. They showed a man who lived in the ashes of what could have been, who wore his guilt like a second skin, and who never once stopped believing that Lily's life had been worth more than his own. He was not a romantic hero. He was a tragic one. The world of Harry Potter is filled with great love stories, James and Lily, Remus and Tonks, even Harry and Ginny. But none are as painful or as powerful as Snape's. It is a love that is never returned, never healed, and never redeemed in the eyes of those who knew him. But it shaped the course of the war, it protected the boy who lived, it defined the end of the saga, and it asked for nothing in return. Lily never knew the full measure of what Snape felt. James never saw the rival he had broken. Dumbledore never offered comfort, only tasks, and Harry, even in the end, only glimpsed the outline of what had been sacrificed for him. The rest was buried in dusty rooms, in half-finished potions, in the cold silence of a man who had once called someone his only friend and had lost her to the world. And so, when readers return to the books, they do not find Severus Snape waiting with open arms. They find him standing alone in the shadows when raised, not to attack, but to conjure a silver doe. A Patronus born of memory of mourning and of a love that no one ever truly understood, not because it wasn't shown, but because it was too immense to be seen all at once. Number 24. Snape, the inventor of spells. Severus. Snape was not merely a potions master or a bitter man lurking in the shadows of Hogwarts. He was a silent architect of magic, a genius whose talents were left largely unexplored by the filmmakers who brought J.K. Rowling's world to the screen. While the movies touch on his duality and bravery, they skim over something far more profound, his unparalleled innovation in spellcraft. The books quietly honor this forgotten legacy, an inventor of spells, a secret guardian of magical science. This Snape is not just the man who loved Lily Evans or spied on Voldemort. He is something rarer, a creator, a wizard whose mind danced on the edge of magic itself. The movies never show the real extent of Snape's brilliance as a magical inventor. The Half-Blood Prince's annotated textbook, a battered copy of Advanced Potion Making, holds more than just scribbled potion notes. It's a diary of magical invention. The handwriting that scrawls across its pages belongs to a boy who wasn't content with mediocrity, who rewrote instructions not to cheat, but because he understood the material better than the author. His tweaks to potion recipes were not random, but precise, improving the draught of living death and other concoctions with an instinctive, scientific elegance. But even more significant than the potion annotations were the spells, original spells, conjured from his imagination. This is a side of Snape the films never dared to explore. Levicorpus, a jinx that hoists its victim into the air by an invisible ankle hold, was one of his inventions, along with its counterspell, Libra Corpus. The movies show Levicorpus briefly but without context, robbing it of its origin, its creator, its meaning. The books reveal that this spell had circulated among Hogwarts students like a whispered secret, but none knew it came from Severus Snape. Then there was Muffliato, a charm so subtle and clever that it bordered on brilliance. It filled the ears of nearby people with an unnoticeable buzzing sound, allowing private conversations to go unheard. Harry had used it several times now without knowing what the word meant, and nobody had yet queried it, Rowling writes in The Half-Blood Prince. It was elegant, understated and effective, like Snape himself. That such a useful charm came from a teenage student speaks volumes about the young Severus's intellect. Yet the films never mention Muffliato, nor do they explore the implications of its design, a spell made not to harm or show off, but to protect speech, to grant silence in a world full of listening ears. The most infamous of Snape's creations was, of course, Sectumsempra. A curse that slashed the victim as though by an invisible sword, it was found by Harry in the Half-Blood Prince's textbook with only a chilling note, "For enemies." The films show the spell in action, but again, they remove its context. They don't let the audience understand that this was not just a curse, it was a secret, hidden in a book, invented by a lonely genius who feared bullies and imagined a weapon to end a beating. The film flattens it into spectacle. The book reveals the deeper tragedy, a boy so wounded he created a curse of pure violence. What the films never explore is the broader implication of these creations. Severus Snape was not merely a practitioner of magic, he was its craftsman. Wizards like him are rare, for they don't just cast spells, they make them. And yet his innovations were never publicly acknowledged. Not once in the wizarding world is his name attached to these spells. They're not taught in schools, not referenced in textbooks. It is as though they were never invented, and this silence is not accidental. It is punishment by omission, the erasure of a Death Eater's name from magical academia. But was he not more than that? Snape's magical genius remained locked inside a reputation he couldn't escape. As a former Death Eater, his word held no authority. His talents, no matter how revolutionary, would never be accepted by the ministry or the academic circles of St. Mungo's or the Department of Mysteries. The stain on his name was indelible, even after his death, even after Harry told his son that Snape was the bravest man he'd ever known. There is no evidence that the wizarding world gave Severus the recognition he deserved. His spells continued to circulate anonymously, their origins lost to the very walls of the school where he spent his life. And it wasn't just about brilliance. There was a quiet ethics to Snape's spell-making. The charm, Muffliato, wasn't created for war, but for privacy. Levicorpus, while humiliating, was non-lethal. Even Sectumsempra, though brutal, wasn't designed for grandeur. It was written as a secret, a line scrawled in a schoolbook, not meant to be used lightly. These were the tools of a young man in pain, navigating a cruel world with spells that reflected both his bitterness and his genius. The films reduce him to a brooding figure with a dramatic death, but the books tell of a creator whose mind might have changed the course of magical history. Imagine a different future had Snape lived. His magical theories might have revolutionized spellcraft. He could have rewritten the way students learn at Hogwarts. His spells could have been tested, refined, and recorded. Instead of being feared as a bitter traitor, he could have been revered as a spellwright, the modern Merlin, the dark horse of magical innovation. But that never happened, and the silence around this possibility is perhaps the most painful part of his story. For what is more tragic than a genius whose work is never credited? Snape's identity as the Half-Blood Prince was more than a schoolboy nickname. It was a mask, a symbol of ambition, of duality. He was the child of two worlds, the product of a Muggle father and a witch mother, torn between self-hatred and longing for acceptance. His secret name became his outlet, his ink and wand confessional. Behind the prince, he found the freedom to create, to experiment. It is a detail the films mention only in passing. But in the book, the moment when Harry whispers, "You've got to be the half-blood prince," is a revelation of mythic proportion. It is not just identity, it is authorship. This idea, Snape as author, never made it to the screen, but it haunts the pages. He wrote spells as a form of resistance, of exploration. He wasn't a follower, he was a pioneer. And while the world followed the rules of textbook incantations, Snape bent the laws of magic with the quiet precision of a poet. His book was more than parchment and ink. It was a spellbook, handwritten by a child genius, and left behind in a cupboard for fate to find. That it ended up in Harry's hands is a narrative miracle. That it was misunderstood by him is the final irony. For Harry, the Half-Blood Prince is a helpful stranger, a silent tutor. For readers, it is a revelation that the boy, Harry, so resents is the same mind behind the wisdom he uses. But for Snape, the textbook was never meant to be found. It was a private archive, a collection of ideas too dangerous to share. He never tried to publish them, never claimed authorship, perhaps knowing that no one would believe a Death Eater could also be a magical visionary, and so he kept his genius locked away like everything else in his life. Snape's story is not just one of love and betrayal. It is a story of brilliance buried beneath a lifetime of wrong choices. A man who could have written the future of magic, but was instead forced to teach dunderheads who never knew his name. His greatest achievements, his spells, lived on, uncredited. His ideas changed lives, but the world refused to remember who had shaped them. To invent a spell is to alter reality, to pull something from the void and give it form. Snape did this, and the world chose to forget. Even Dumbledore, who knew more than anyone about Snape's strengths, never spoke publicly of his magical inventions. Perhaps to protect him, perhaps out of strategy, but the effect was the same, erasure. Not even Harry, who inherits Snape's memories, ever reflects on the lost spells, on the book that once whispered answers in his hand. He honors Snape for his bravery, but not for his genius. And that is a silence more brutal than slander. There is something unbearably tragic about a mind like Snape's being wasted in a dungeon classroom. His lessons were brilliant, yes, but they were not the limit of what he could do. The man who could correct Slughorn's potions, invent new curses, and craft his own counter-charms should have been writing textbooks, leading research, but the war, the shame, and the shadow of Voldemort crushed those possibilities. Hogwarts became both his sanctuary and his prison. When Snape dies, he doesn't speak of his spells, he speaks of Lily, but perhaps that was always his greatest spell, his love for her, woven into everything he did, from joining Dumbledore's cause to saving Harry time and again. His magic was not in the wand, but in the choice to keep going. Still, part of his soul lives in those pages of his old textbook, where annotations curl around margins like vines, spells never spoken aloud, ideas never shared, a treasure hidden in plain sight. It is the bitterest irony that Harry, so desperate to understand who the Half-Blood Prince was, never fully appreciates the man behind the ink. He sees the use but not the source. The films rob audiences of this realization. They do not let us see Snape as a creator. But the books quietly and without spectacle reveal him as one of the most innovative minds in the wizarding world, a boy who invented magic, a man whose name never made it into the footnotes. To be a spellwright in a world ruled by tradition is to be radical. Snape was that radical, but his politics and his past made him invisible. And so he dies as he lived, uncelebrated, misunderstood, essential. His legacy is not only in his bravery or in Harry's survival, it is in the unseen, unspoken magic that he gave to the world and that the world refused to name. Severus Snape, the hidden hand behind whispered incantations, the spellmaker who was never given a chapter of his own. Number 25, Attempt to Save Lupin and Tonks. During the final and most devastating hours of the Battle of Hogwarts, the air was thick with spells, screams, and the roar of collapsing stone. In the Great Hall, amid the ruin and grief, the bodies of Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks lay side by side, cold and lifeless, their hands just inches from touching. The film adaptation of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows allows no room for explanation, no backstory, no final stand, no trace of how these beloved characters met their tragic end. But the book hints, in careful layers, at a hidden struggle behind their fall. There, in the shadows between lines, whispers a name absent from the screen during these moments: Severus Snape. While the films reduce Snape's final contributions to a single act of martyrdom and his secret love for Lily Potter, J.K. Rowling's novel threads a deeper narrative. In The Prince's Tale, Dumbledore's memories make a clear request to Snape: you must protect the students at Hogwarts, and if you can, Severus, help the Order. These words carry more than a general plea. They suggest action, choice, and sacrifice. Dumbledore knew the war would reach Hogwarts. He also knew that Snape, positioned like a cursed pawn between Voldemort and the Order, could influence outcomes if he dared. Lupin had always been a point of tension for Snape. Their shared past at Hogwarts, tainted by James Potter's mockery and Sirius Black's recklessness, left no room for friendship. Yet in The Half-Blood Prince, when Dumbledore sends Lupin to live among the werewolves to spread hope, Snape makes the wolfsbane potion each full moon without fail. He never speaks of it. He never earns praise. And in that silence lies the truth, that even for those he disliked, Snape fulfilled his promises. During the Battle of Hogwarts, many duels and deaths occur off-page, and Tonks and Lupin's deaths are among them. Their lifeless bodies appear suddenly with no description of the moment their lives were taken. But there is an eerie pattern in how Rowling writes the chaos. Moments of death are either detailed vividly, like Fred Weasley's, or described with painful absence, leaving behind a sense of injustice. Snape's final memory, shared with Harry, reveals a lifetime of hidden action. It's within this context that a compelling theory takes root. Snape tried to intervene in the fatal duel between Lupin and Antonin Dolohov, but he failed. Dolohov, a known sadist and one of Voldemort's most brutal followers, had already left a trail of horror. He was the Death Eater who nearly killed Hermione in the Department of Mysteries. His name is synonymous with destruction. It is no stretch to imagine him engaging Lupin in a brutal clash amid the battle's chaos. Lupin, despite his experience and skill, faced him alone. Tonks, desperate to reach her husband, is drawn into the same deadly spiral, and yet the books never confirm who struck the fatal blow. They only offer silence. But silence, in Rowling's universe, is often where Snape works best. The idea that Snape, aware of Dumbledore's directive and his own twisted sense of duty, would attempt to save Lupin and Tonks is not sentimental. It's consistent with the character that emerges in his dying memories. He saves the trio from the Carrow's tortures, he attempts to shield students from Voldemort's wrath, and he avoids killing unless absolutely necessary. Even when he slashes George Weasley's ear, it is by accident, trying to redirect a Death Eater's curse. Snape, the so-called traitor, had become a silent guardian. There's an odd detail in Deathly Hallows when Harry observes Snape fleeing the scene. Snape was on the move again, keeping to the shadows, running through the corridors like a shadow himself. He is not attacking. He is not leading Death Eaters. He is avoiding confrontation, but not with cowardice, with purpose. His route takes him near the area where Lupin and Tonks fall. This is a subtle but deliberate placement, and Rowling's prose rarely places characters randomly during crucial moments. Snape is close, too close for coincidence. Some readers have noted that after Lupin's death, his son Teddy is mentioned with surprising frequency. Harry's decision to godfather the boy and the narrative's attention to the orphaned child almost mirrors the story of Snape himself, a boy abandoned, bitter, and alone. And this raises a question. What if Snape's motivation for saving Lupin had nothing to do with affection and everything to do with prevention, preventing another child from growing up like him, without a father, with only grief? There's another clue in the way Snape's memories unfold. He shows Harry not only Lily but also his efforts to keep students safe, his insistence on protecting Draco, his warning to Dumbledore about the attack on the astronomy tower. Yet he skips his efforts during the final battle. Is it possible those memories were left out not because they didn't exist, but because there was not enough time? Or perhaps because those efforts failed? Snape had failed to save the Potters. If he tried to save Lupin and Tonks and failed again, he may have chosen not to let Harry see that grief. The films show Snape's death as a solitary tragedy beside the boathouse. But in the book, the Shrieking Shack is the chosen place, a location tied to his past, to Lupin, and to the Marauders' cruel games. It is as if, poetically, Snape's story was always intertwined with Lupin's. That they would both die on the same night, in the same castle, seems more than literary symmetry. It feels like unfinished business. Snape may have viewed saving Lupin not as redemption, but as a closing of a chapter long stained by resentment. The very last duel between Harry and Voldemort is surrounded by fallen comrades. We see the results of battle, but not its paths. Tonks, who had left her infant son to return to the fight, would not have faced the front lines unless compelled by desperation. It is plausible that she sensed Lupin was in danger. She, like Harry's mother, chose love over safety. Snape, who had failed to protect Lily, might have seen this parallel and tried to stop history from repeating itself. It's important to understand that Snape's heroism is not born from righteousness. It is born from obsession, duty, and guilt. Saving Lupin and Tonks would have been his way of honoring Dumbledore's request, fulfilling his role in the prophecy's endgame, and perhaps proving to himself that he could protect someone, anyone, even a man he once despised, even a woman he barely knew. One curious line appears in the aftermath of the battle, when Harry sees the bodies in the Great Hall. Rowling writes, "They did not seem dead, but asleep, the pale hand of Lupin on Tonks's shoulder." This softness is haunting. It suggests not a gruesome death, but a quiet one, possibly indicating they fell to a killing curse, precise and final. This would fit Dolohov's style, or perhaps Bellatrix's, if Tonks had engaged her. But if Snape was nearby and saw it coming, a missed second could have meant the end. In a 2007 web chat with fans, Rowling confirmed that Tonks and Lupin died fighting Death Eaters, but intentionally left the scene unwritten. Why? Perhaps because the fight itself was not the point. Perhaps because the scene, if shown, would have included a figure readers were not ready to see in that role. Snape, not as betrayer, not as double agent, but as a man trying too late to save two people who had already accepted their fate. The omissions in the films not only strip Snape of this potential redemption, but deny the audience a crucial dimension of his complexity. He was never a clean-cut hero and never meant to be, but he was capable of painful, deliberate acts of goodness. The films give us his love for Lily, his protection of Harry, and his lonely death. But they do not give us his failure, his human, harrowing inability to do enough. This missing scene, Snape rushing into a corridor in time to see Dolohov raise his wand, Snape choosing a curse to disarm and not to kill, Snape arriving a heartbeat too late, is more than fan theory, it is thematic continuity. It is the end of a story that began not with loyalty or love, but with guilt. And guilt, above all, was the weight Severus Snape carried until the very end. In the final moments of his life, Snape gives Harry his memories, not his victories, not his battles, but his truth. He lets Harry see the boy who loved and lost, the man who became a monster to stop a greater one. But perhaps, had there been time, he would have shared this scene too, the moment he tried and failed once again to save a family, the moment he ran through smoke and spells not for himself, not for Lily, not for Dumbledore, but for two people he never truly knew. And that may be the most human act of all. Number 26. Painful memories of a broken childhood. In the half-lit memory chamber of the pensive, the world turned grey, the colours faded like bruises beneath the surface, and Harry Potter found himself witnessing something he never expected to see. Severus Snape, not as the terrifying professor in sweeping black robes, but as a small, pale boy, fragile as parchment and curled up in the corner of a dim sitting room. The films, in their relentless pursuit of pacing and grandeur, glossed over this formative fragment of Snape's soul, a passage that reshaped how readers understood his bitterness, his obsession with power, and his complex, aching love for Lily Evans. This scene, buried in Chapter 26 of Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, remains one of the most haunting, and its absence on screen left a gap too wide for any adult Snape monologue to bridge. He was only 9 or 10 when Harry saw him for the first time in this memory, and yet his appearance already bore the trademarks of his future self: sallow skin, greasy black hair, and dark, hollow eyes that seemed too old for a child. But this was no potions master sneering at incompetence. This was a boy watching the world from a hiding place, listening with wide, frightened eyes to the roar of his father, Tobias Snape, and the weary, defeated murmurs of his mother, Eileen Prince. The house was a poor one, dirty, cramped, with peeling wallpaper and the air of a place long given up on happiness. The boy did not speak. He did not cry. He simply waited for the shouting to stop. Tobias Snape was a muggle, a bitter man whose anger seemed endless, often directed at the one thing he could not understand: magic. It was not just disdain, it was violence, a dark, trembling fury that turned his home into a prison. Eileen, once a student at Hogwarts, once a witch of ambition, was now a faded shadow who rarely smiled and never laughed. She endured in silence, and her silence became a blueprint for her son. Young Severus learned early that the safest way to survive was to speak little, observe everything, and trust no one. The film adaptation chose to highlight Snape's adult sacrifice and final redemption, but it refused to dwell on the quiet tragedies that shaped his soul. In the book, when Dumbledore and Harry visit this memory, the pain is raw. The scene changed. They were now in a small sitting room, where a thin woman with a pinched face sat watching two children playing in the yard through a dirty window. The text says, "That woman is Eileen Prince, watching her son from behind the glass. The child playing outside is not Severus, it's Lily. Lily Evans, the girl from across the street with red hair that caught the sunlight and laughter that filled the air. Severus is not playing, he is watching her. He is drawn to her like a moth to light, fascinated by her confidence, her warmth, her magic. She doesn't know what he is yet, doesn't know that he's like her, but he knows. He's seen her make petals dance, make leaves float. He's seen the same longing in her that he feels in himself, longing to escape, to belong, to be more. And so, like any child desperate for connection, he waits for the right moment. He does not introduce himself in a friendly way. He corrects her, tells her what she's doing is magic, not a trick. It's not kindness that drives him, its need. His desperation to be accepted was more than a schoolboy crush, it was a lifeline. Lily was the first person who made Severus feel visible. In Spinner's End, where neighbours whispered, and the house stank of mildew and rage, Lily's voice was a balm. She spoke with joy. She didn't flinch when she found out he was a wizard. She marvelled. She wanted to know more, and Severus, clumsy and awkward, shared everything he knew. He told her about Hogwarts. He told her about the Sorting Hat. He hoped, beyond hope, that they'd be in Slytherin together. But even then, the rot had begun to fester inside him. A boy from a broken home, laughed at for his appearance, growing up in fear and shame, he learned to believe that love had to be earned through superiority. He threw himself into learning spells, mastering curses, memorizing potion ingredients not for the joy of it, but to build a fortress. Power became his armor, knowledge his only currency. While Lily sparkled in every class and made friends easily, Severus clung to the shadows and gravitated toward those who respected cruelty more than kindness. The future Death Eaters welcomed him not because they liked him, but because he was useful, and he needed to feel useful more than he needed to be happy. What the films never show is how often Severus's longing twisted into anger. When Lily laughed with James, when she didn't sit beside him in class, when she questioned his friends, that same voice that echoed through Spinner's End, Tobias's voice, rose inside his chest. The man who raised him taught him that the world would only obey if you made it fear you. And so even in his friendship with Lily, Severus couldn't help but lash out, trying to dominate what he feared losing. The moment he called her a mudblood was not an accident. It was a breakdown, a child who didn't know how to love without hurting. And yet, the boy in the memory still tried. When Lily walked away, wounded and angry, he begged for forgiveness. He didn't know how to say, "I love you." He only knew how to say, "Don't leave me." But she did. And Snape learned once more what it meant to be alone. Alone like his mother in that peeling house. Alone like he'd always been. Dumbledore saw this. He showed Harry not just to explain Snape's motivations, but to reveal the weight of a life built on suffering. He loved her for nearly all his life, and even after she chose another, even after she died, that love became the reason he protected her son, not because he liked Harry, he didn't, but because Harry was what remained of her. The films, for all their grandeur, turned this into a simple narrative of redemption, but the books showed the depth of it, the obsessive, broken, desperate loyalty of a man shaped by a childhood no one should endure.